Hello, my name's David Ward. I am the Garden and Nursery Director at the Beth Chatto Gardens, situated just outside of Colchester in Essex.
David, thank you for talking to the Affinity Water podcast series.
Right,
Again,
welcome.
you are
Welcome
our resident gardener advisor, and here we are standing at the Beth Chatto Gardens at Elmstead Market in Essex. But in front of us, where are you going to take us first?
So we're going to have a look around the drought-resistant gravel garden that has been here 30 years this year, 30 years. Never been watered, artificially watered. So a challenging summer we've just had, but we've been through it before, so we know how it copes. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's walk towards the gravel garden, and there is indeed, as our listeners will hear, gravel under our feet. But, never been watered, yet I can still see plants in bloom.
Yes, a few plants in bloom, some or hylotelephiums as we know, sedums as everyone knows them, a few autumn flowering bulbs, but mainly, especially with the dry weather, things often go into sort of survival mode. So there's a lot of seed heads, a lot of sort of texture, grasses, lots of foliage, and it's just starting to come back from the dry spell. I mean, we had a brutally dry spell, 14 millimetres of rain in 10 weeks, and very hot temperatures, of course, that we had this summer. So probably the worst, the most challenging I've known.
And so even the drought garden at Beth Chatto Gardens felt the impact of the hot weather this summer?
Yeah, most certainly. But the plants are chosen to cope with those conditions, so they might not look their best. I mean, they would all appreciate a little bit more rain during the summer and they'd look good, but the idea is that they survive. So they do that various means. They might just sort of all shrivel and the leaves curl up, and that's one way that that stop the sort of sun on the leaves. And then when it does turn cooler, as it usually does in this country eventually, and damper, out they come again. So plants like these, begonias, quite a common plant, were all drooping and look very sad for themselves, but now look at them, they've all perked up.
And you mentioned seed heads. We are indeed standing in front of some very fine seed heads. And they came to the fore more because of the hot weather.
So another way for plants to sort of survive, because that's what a plant wants to do, is to produce more seed. So they tend to sort of flower well and they want to seed. So I mean, not every, it's a bit of a generalisation, but so this phlomis, for example, probably don't think it. Again, I've never seen it looking so good because it wants to survive. It wants to throw seed and survive that way. Luckily, the plants are actually surviving. So, and we leave the seed heads on for aesthetic, look nice, for the wildlife benefits, all the little ladybirds, etc., living in those seed heads. So we'll leave them on as long as possible.
And in terms of watering a garden, you really don't need to water if you plant the right plants. Is that right?
Well, there's a couple of things to it. Right plant, right place is certainly extremely important. So all these plants come from all over the world. South America, the Mediterranean obviously, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, all over, but they're adapted to survive the dry conditions. But equally as important as this sort of right plant, right place is soil preparation. So we are naturally on a very dry, sandy, gravelly soil. Had this been a sort of clay, sticky soil, we probably couldn't use this palette of plants. We'd have to think differently. And Beth was very keen in her garden just to use and make the best of the conditions that she had. So we do have areas of sticky clay, we do have water gardens, we do have dry shade as well as sunny shade, but this drought-resistant garden is in the open, it's in full sun, and it's a very dry, sandy soil. So that's where plant choice comes in. But soil preparation, you've got to give plants the best you can, not the worst you have. So we do put a lot of effort into soil preparation, i.e. adding organic matter when we're sort of preparing an area as well, no matter where we are.
Well, let's just stroll round to the begonias that you said were looking droopy, but now they've revived after a very hot summer. But what would you be doing in the autumn to help these plants thrive? Is there anything that we should be doing?
Well, we certainly sort of have a bit of a clear up, so any rain that does fall can get directly down to the roots. So this part of the garden might look pretty well, looks after itself. A lot of visitors tend to think that, but I can assure you the the gardeners here are very skilled at editing and maintaining this type of garden. So plants are often cut back. I mean, especially this summer, say a plant like a catmint, say quite a common plant, flowers sort of late April, May into June. But if it's really dry summer like this summer, the gardeners will come in and cut those right down to the ground, and they'll just sort of survive, be dormant for longer because it's dry, and then they'll reshoot slowly throughout the summer and into the autumn. They might even rebloom. So another of Beth's favourite sayings was, don't use the hose pipe, use the secateurs. So a lot of cutting back. So like lavenders, everyone probably grows a lavender. Trim it down after it's flowered. As soon as the colour's gone out of the flowers, cut it back with some, shears or secateurs. You back in just below the flower stems into the new wood, but not too far into the old wood, and they'll refurbish themselves up and make better plants.
I haven't heard that one. Don't use the hose pipe, use the secateurs.
Well,
I'd heard right plant, right place, but did you really say that?
Well, she certainly didn't coin the phrase right plant, right place. Beth really picked it up and moved it on. But yes, no, the secateur and it's in one of her books, so it must be in the Gravel Garden book somewhere.
And you mentioned yourself that you have never experienced a hot summer like this, but we have had drought periods before, and you remember them.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I know. You don't think I'm old enough, but I do remember the 70s. So yeah, 1976 was actually my first year working in gardening, and I was actually working in a tomato greenhouse, so I did know what it was like in 76. But we had dry spells in the 70s. We had 2 summers in 73, 74, 74, 75. Extremely dry summers. We had 14 inches of rain. So our average here is 21 inches of rain a year. So 2 summers consecutively in the 70s of 14 inches. So, that was just a little bit before my time starting, but that would have been interesting. But then the gravel garden wasn't here then. It was only planted in early 90s.
So for our listeners at home to the Affinity Water podcast, if we stroll on a bit further, David, I mean, it looks almost like little islands in this drought garden, and they can go to your website and perhaps see more of it, and they can go to the Affinity Water website to find out how to save water in the garden. But if you were going to create something like this from scratch, if you were a gardener at home thinking, right, well, we've had this hot, dry summer, and I wasn't happy with what happened to the plants in my garden, but I'm going to try and make a drought garden, how would you begin?
Well, as I say, this garden is here because it is a dry, sandy soil. So that really is, a prerequisite. Really, if you're on a sticky, heavy clay soil, then you're probably looking at a different palette of plants. So you wouldn't quite have this effect, but you can grow different plants that we just couldn't even grow here. Or you'd be looking at raised beds, perhaps raising it up and putting a freer draining mix in the raised beds, and then you could have this type of planting, and the plants would actually probably benefit to some degree because they would get their roots down into your much more nutrient-rich clay soil. But drainage is key, so you have to build in some drainage to raised beds.
And raised beds have become much more popular of recent years.
Yeah, they are. I mean, there's lots of materials you can use, but do fill it with a nice free draining mix. If you really want to sort of experiment, we're playing around with planting in sand, pure sand, just ballast, which is quite interesting. So that's where right plant, right place and plant choice is really critical, with some interesting results. Yeah. So that's taking this drought-resistant garden even a step further.
Well, we're standing under a magnificent, amazingly tall eucalyptus tree, white and gleaming. But just beyond, have you got any favourite plants or flowers in your drought garden?
Well, just this time of year, for example, a plant called Garden and Nursery, which is now called Anothera lindheimeri. It's just those little white flowers sort of waving just under that tree there. It's called butterfly plant. It's actually a relative of fuchsia. It's in the same family as fuchsia. It looks nothing like a fuchsia. But that flowers from sort of July through till the frosts come, really. It grows about 2 to 3 feet high. A really good sort of reliable long flowering plant, but must have free draining sunny soil. Grasses, of course, you can't. Stipa gigantea here, the golden oak grass.
Which looks lovely against the backdrop of the eucalyptus tree, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does. By the way, eucalyptus, I would not advise anybody to plant eucalyptus in their own back garden. This one is probably approaching 75, 80 feet tall in 30 years, so it's much taller than the oaks that have been here 300 years. So, buyer beware on that one.
Okay, well, we've already got some good tips in the first of this series of 3 podcasts with Beth Chatto Gardens in autumn 2022. So that is to use the shears, not the watering
For
can.
certain plants, certainly things like catmint, cistus, for example. So we can't grow roses in this part of the garden; it's just too dry. So we grow plants like cistus, rock roses, sun roses. So after they've flowered, which is usually sort of May, June, again they'll get a trim. And all these plants here are cistus. You can see they're all shooting out now. Catmints, lavenders, all kinds of plants. Chelsea chop plants, so your sedums, don't just let them grow, chop them. Basically you just take a third off in sort of May time, and they won't just come up and be tall and flop over. They'll shoot out and they'll still flower in the autumn.
And of course you can then, as you say, have a little play with raised beds if you want to. David, where are we going to next?
So we're going to walk, complete contrast, we're going to walk down to the water garden and have a look at the contrast there.
All right, well, thanks for talking to us, and we'll pick up again with you shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.